Alexander. We started the interview by talking about his platform. Alexander's platform belongs to the independent media you mentioned, which also exists in Germany, just like in the US. And yes, on February 12, 2025, Alexander received a threatening letter from the Lower Saxony State Media Authority. Tell me about that. Yes, I was surprised too. I knew them, of course, from previous legal proceedings. So it happens like this. You have to know who the Lower Saxony State Media Authority actually is. Nobody in the US will know what that is, but if you ask people in Germany, nobody knows either. The media authorities originally had something positive. Originally, I have to explain this briefly. Originally, there was only publicly funded broadcasting in Germany. And at some point in the 1970s, someone came up with the idea of trying something private. Then there were cable pilot projects, as they were called. So broadcast frequencies were limited, but you could broadcast more over cable. And in this context, private television was also to be permitted. Private radio, citizen radio frequencies, a lot of experiments were to take place. And in this context, because media matters like press matters fall under state law, the state established state media authorities. They were essentially a kind of administrative unit to the respective public broadcasting entities. They employed something like 2 to 5 people, and their task was to do some legal coordination to help rather than suppress, because they wanted to give the media a bit of wings, not feet of lead. That was what happened. At some point, all these plans for independent broadcasters vanished. What remained were the major private television stations, which you might also know in America, RTL or Pro7 or SAT1, which means the large, highly professional broadcasters, who are certainly on par with equivalent broadcasters in the US in terms of quality or lack of quality. In any case, these are highly professional broadcasters. And then there are also radio channels, but they are usually clustered into larger professional entities. In plain English, that means there's nothing left to manage or monitor. Additionally, we got these state media authorities, and in the meantime, the number of their employees has increased from about 5 each to several hundred each. So we are talking about the growth of civil servants. And then people thought about how to finance this nonsense. We said, yes, well, we'll finance it like this. We'll take a percentage, a legally defined percentage, as license fees for public broadcasting, and we'll pass that on to finance the administrative authorities. And now we are talking about an amount that is between 160 and 200 million euros per year simply to monitor nothing at all. But the thing is, civil servants are never unemployed. They seek tasks to do, and that's what they did. Originally, it started with child protection, because you always choose a topic that no one can oppose. So you're against child protection. No one can say that. When child protection wasn't that interesting anymore because no one believed in it anymore, then the second topic came along, child pornography. Who is in favor of child pornography? Yes, nobody is in favor of child pornography. So they should take a closer look, also address child pornography, all topics that were undisputed. So, and this has now been piggybacked on all sorts of topics, political extremism, hate, and monitoring people. Now I'm back to Alexander Wallasch, a journalistic due diligence. I'm going to ask a question, and I can't answer this question right away. What is journalistic due diligence? In Germany, it's an undefined legal term. In other words, when I say a table, I can imagine what it means. Journalistic due diligence, however, is an abstraction. It has never been clearly defined by our justice system in a legal context. And now the state media authority claims that if I write an article, then I have to cite sources. Bullshit. An article is not a doctoral thesis. If I write a doctoral thesis, I have to cite sources. There are footnotes. But in an article, I can claim all sorts of things. I can even mix opinions and facts. I can say all sorts of things. The natural limit of expressing opinions, and expressing opinions in media is a subset of expressing opinions, is that if I defame someone, they can sue me. That is when it gets dangerous. But there's no state verifiable and enforceable claim to due diligence. That's already been fully tested. There is what is called voluntary self-regulation, which means the major publishers have joined forces and they created a press council, and you can complain there. And what the press council does is they can issue reprimands. They can say, hey, you wrote something nasty there. Please don't do that again. So no fines, just reprimands. Because a reprimand is already an insult. That doesn't apply to the new independent media. They can be prosecuted by the authorities, and they can now even prohibit further transmission, which means that they can block your website. Okay. And in the threatening letter from this Lower Saxony Federal Media Authority, I read it. And they are constantly talking about how Alexander is said to have violated or could have violated all sorts of principles of this journalistic due diligence mandate. And you just told me that journalistic due diligence is considered an undefined legal term according to German law. So what they're doing is, legal speaking, I'd say they wouldn't even pass the first law examination. Why? If I have a legal term that ultimately leads to a cease and desist claim or a prohibition procedure, I have to say exactly what is illegal. I must explain to the defendant what he or she violated with this sentence or that sentence in an article, according to the established case law of the Federal Constitutional Court or the Federal Court of Justice. But no, that is not happening. Instead, they just say that what you wrote here was somehow not carefully enough written and issue a warning. Like treating children, sort of, right? Alexander Wallasch is a very productive person. He has certainly published several thousand articles on his platform. I don't even think he himself knows how many exactly. So, and then they say in this threat letter that he must go over all of his past articles and check if they violate this legally undefined thing called journalistic due diligence. Well, I maintain, and I used to work as a freelance journalist myself at some point, that I don't even remember what exactly I wrote and when, so you can't check that within a few weeks. The attack itself is coercion. I have since written a response to the state media authority, and I'm basically telling them, but in legal terms, go screw yourself. Alexander is not going to do anything you ask him to do. We won't check anything. Go ahead and initiate proceedings against him. Yes, I read the answer. What is interesting is that this threatening letter does not even say, you have violated this journalistic due diligence obligation, whatever that might be, but they say, and I think in every single case, you may have violated your due diligence obligation. How do you interpret that, this vagueness of expression? Yes, now we're getting to how this is, in my opinion, probably found. Now we are already in the next topic, which is kiwi. That sounds pretty delicious initially, like a tropical fruit, although apparently they don't originate in New Zealand but in China. Anyway, our kiwi is spelled with a V. And this kiwi is an AI, an artificial intelligence system, although certainly not at the ChatGPT level. And it's been developed in Germany. It's a German software, and it is used by the state media authorities and uniformly by all state media authorities in Germany in order to surveil all social media nationwide. And not only in Germany, also in America. Germany also surveils X, including the US part of X. The Kiwi AI crawls through it and, as in all artificial intelligence systems, points out what it regards as not acceptable. So this Kiwi system can, for example, identify a swastika. Well, and then there are watchwords like moron and many others, and the Kiwi picks those out and issues alerts. And Kiwi then presents the employees of the state media authorities with these instances and tells them, I found this bunch of dubious content today. And then the employees initiate the sending out of threat letters to those people who created the content that Kiwi found objectionable. And these letters, they are not signed by a person, Mr. Meyer, for example. No, at the end of the letter it says, Your Team Regulation, and I call it Your Censorship Team. There aren't any names anymore indicating who sent the letter, and these letters are sent to anyone who was flagged by KIVI, not only to the media, but also to every single individual person who liked a post on Facebook that KIVI regards as suspicious. The content of all social media on the entire internet is checked by KIVI across the board for contributions, repostings, likes, and what KIVI throws up is then evaluated centrally. And if there is any chance that these contributions, repostings, and likes might possibly be a punishable crime, they will systematically be forwarded by the state media authorities to German state prosecutors, which means to law enforcement agencies. Do you think that this threat letter that Alexander received was automatically sent by KIVI? No. No, This thing is not a completely developed autonomous AI. This was picked up by a state employee who said this and that is interesting and then categorized it. It is just like with the exculpation letters for doctors. It's a mass procedure. The state employee calls up a template and he or she fills in the template, which means the employees do not really look into the matter flagged by KIVI and try to judge it. No, they aim to send out as many threat letters as they can. There is no intellectual investigation into the flagged content whatsoever. The goal of the whole exercise is not to check what KIVI throws up, but the goal is to exert administrative pressure. Is it usual in Germany to find a signature in such threat letters that says team regulation or team anything? I consider the latter to be legally meaningless. In German law, there is the so-called Administrative Act, which is a notification where you are told by the authorities to do something or to pay something. This is a letter, a so-called listen up letter. It basically says, hey, you, listen up, so that you know you have to be careful. This letter is nothing more than that. The German authorities now have to decide whether they switch to second gear. We are waiting for that, and I hope for that, yes. Because there is not a single administrative court judgment in Germany that ordered an internet platform to shut down because of the violation of journalistic due diligence. What's happening here is pure censorship, and that is so obvious to experts and non-experts alike, so obvious that even those who are against it almost smile because it is so brazen. So you are hoping that they'll take the second step with real proceedings against Alexander Wallasch. I really hope so, because I'd like to take this all the way to the Federal Administrative Court. But they won't do that because they are not stupid, because they'll only do that in cases they can win with almost absolute certainty. And we recently won a case in our law firm. It was about the ban of the conservative magazine Compact. Perhaps you heard about that. And our team obtained an injunction against Ms. Feser at the Federal Administrative Court, ordering her to reverse the ban of the newspaper. And since then, they have been cautious. They specifically chose this magazine back then because it was very right-wing and the people involved with it weren't particularly sympathetic. That means that for such cases where the state wants to set a precedent, the state is looking for someone who is unlikable and who really did something that is forbidden. Well, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of the case with Compact where they tried to ban the newspaper. Is that right? No, they banned it. If you research it, it's all still online. 150 police officers were searching online. They conducted house searches at a total of 17 locations, pulled the men out of bed, seized computers, even took the office chairs. And all of this is under the umbrella of the so-called ban on associations. You have to imagine that Compact is a GmbH, something like an incorporation. And under the law of association, all of this was seized. He had never been convicted before, nor had anyone said that any of the articles in the magazine were relevant from a criminal point of view. The man was clean, completely clean. He was attacked for right-wing agitation, and that's why the magazine was banned. And what they did was so blatantly absurd that even Germany's left-wing Federal Administrative Court overturned the judgment in preliminary proceedings. Interesting. So KIVI is a surveillance tool. Yes, it's a primitive AI. It's not really artificial intelligence, but it's a tool that searches. It's a kind of crawler. Yes, exactly. It kind of crawls through the digital content of social media platforms. How exactly does that work? I mean, you already talked a bit about the algorithm, which is a certain, yes, I have the complete manual. So the user manual, yes, the user manual that the employees use, how to use KIVI, yes, and from the user manual, you can deduce their way of thinking, how they proceed. KIVI crawls through online content and flags what it is trained to regard as problematic content. And KIVI even sorts it according to urgency and basically produces something almost good enough to be sent out as a letter. And then the state officials have to look through what KIVI spits out. They have to scan it all quickly and decide, yes, send a threat letter or no, or maybe. And they are suffering from it at the moment. You have to imagine how crazy the system is. There could be child pornography in there every now and then. There are now even teams whose responsibility it is to ensure that state officials do not have to watch the porn so that the employees of the state media authority are not being traumatized by watching something illegal. This is so funny or crazy that it's actually sick. What's happening there is sick. The mind is sick. And the question is, child pornography is right at the top, and at the end they have to see what they have found overall on the analysis, and that is predominantly political extremism. But political extremism is not a crime. Let's put it this way. If Mr. Trump and the Republicans lived in Germany, first of all, he would be banned by the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. He definitely would have been arrested 3 times, and lots of other bad things would have happened. And I'm not talking about Trump as a person, but the way he presents himself and the political content he expresses in America. That would be worthy of prison in Germany, just to give you a benchmark. So this KIVI tool, of course, not only searches social media platforms, but also all these independent digital media. Yes, it crawls through everything. For now, we have just one problem. The internet crawling is done by the AI system, but the analysis of what it finds isn't done by AI yet. And currently, a lot of government funding is dumped into creating an AI system that would function like a ChatGPT for analysis of flagged content. That's the next step. And once that's achieved, total surveillance of the internet in Germany will be complete. Right now, the bottleneck is the number of human analysts that will then be eliminated. What will this feel like when that is achieved? Currently, these analysts or evaluators of flagged content must be completely overwhelmed. Yes, and that's why they are slowing down the system from within, because they can't process more than 10,000 flagged things per day. But you can see how slowly they work. I don't know how many people they need to work through 10,000 flagged content pieces per day, but imagine how many millions of flagged content they can work through once the analysis is done with AI as well. But anyway, how is this widespread and in the future total surveillance of thoughts expressed online compatible with the democracy and with the German Constitution and with criminal law?
Vereinbar mit einer Demokratie und mit der Verfassung von Deutschland und mit dem Strafrecht.
Well, there used to be a country called the German Democratic Republic. And in that respect, it's perfectly consistent with democracy. However, that has nothing to do with democracy as it is understood in the US. And it has nothing at all to do with freedom of expression. It's nothing other than a state fascist system that's being created here. I really call it state fascist. So what is the German Democratic Republic? The German Democratic Republic used to be the GDR, essentially the eastern part of Germany, which collapsed in 1989 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in the GDR, there was state socialism, Staatssozialismus. And this state socialism said that it protects socialist freedom of expression. And today in Germany, woke freedom of expression is protected. That reminds me, after the election earlier this year in Germany, they had an election, federal election, and a colored map of Germany was published, colored depending on which party had the most support. And it was astonishing because the former GDR was blue, so AfD, blue is the color for the AfD, and the Federal Republic, the old Federal Republic before reunifications of West Germany, was black with a few blue dots. Black, that's the color for the CDU. You can see that the people who lived in the GDR and who still remember it, or the children of those people, have a better sense of what is currently going on in Germany and how freedom is being undermined in Germany. Kudos to the new German citizens, new in quotation marks, new since 1989. They let themselves be screwed for 30 years by a system, actually for 40 years, that lied to them and pissed on them. And that system always said, we are a democracy, we are better, things here are more beautiful. And the East
Und die hatten
Germans had
immer super
visitors
vom
from the
Westen
West.
gehabt,
The
die haben
East
sich das
Germans watched
Westfernsehen
Western
angesehen und
television,
wussten
and every
täglich,
single
dass sie
day they
verarscht
knew that they
werden,
were being
weil ihre
screwed because
persönliche
what they personally
Lebenswirklichkeit und
experienced
das,
in
was
their
sie in den
lives
Medien
and what they
gehört
heard
haben,
in the
immer
media
weiter
was drifting
auseinanderfiel.
further and further
Und genau
apart.
das tritt
And
auch bei
that's
uns
exactly
ein,
what's happening
aber die
here now
erinnern sich
too.
wieder.
But
Das
the
soll der
former East
DNA des
Germans, they
Volkes.
remember,
Die
it's in their
spüren das und
DNA, they
deshalb
feel
wählen
it,
die
and that's why
AfD.
they
Das
vote
sind
for
gar
the
nicht alles
AfD.
zwingend
They aren't
AfD-Fans,
necessarily all
sondern es
AfD
sind
fans.
eigentlich
Many
nur
are actually voting
Negativstimmen gegen
against
das
the
bestehende
existing system,
System,
voting
das immer
against it,
mehr
which is increasingly
sich
morphing into something we
kapselt in
don't
etwas, was
want.
wir nicht mehr wollen.
And why is
Und
the
warum
AfD
wird in
regarded as
Deutschland die
such an
AfD
immense
als eine
threat in
derartige
Germany?
Bedrohung gesehen?
Well, I would
Ich
say
würde
it's
sagen, das ist
multidimensional, but
multidimensional.
that's
Aber
just
zieh
my
es meine
personal opinion.
persönliche
First of
Meinung.
all,
Also einmal,
the
die
existence of the
AfD
AfD is
ist
the
die
CDU's
Existenz der
declaration of
AfD ist die
bankruptcy.
Konkurserklärung der CDU.
The CDU, at
Die
its
CDU
best, had
hatte
48 to
zu
50% of the
besten
vote.
Zeiten
Helmut
48 bis
Kohl
50%
achieved a
der
very good
Stimmen. Also
result, I
Helmut
think just
Kohl
under
hatte ein sehr
49%
gutes
of the
Ergebnis
federal
bekommen,
elections,
ich glaube, von knapp
49% for the
49% bei den
CDU.
Bundestagswahlen.
And when Franz Josef
49% für die
Strauß ran for
CDU.
chancellor
Und
in
der Strauß hat
1980, he
1980 als
suffered what was
Bundeskanzler
regarded as a
kandidiert und
crushing
hatte eine
defeat because
Niederlage,
he
eine
only
krachende
achieved
gekriegt, weil der nur
45% for the CDU.
45% für die CDU erreicht hatte.
So this is
Also
where
aus
the
den Zeiten
CDU
kommt die
used to be.
CDU.
If you look
Wenn
at
Sie
the
heute die
CDU
CDU
today, it's
sehen,
perhaps
die
at
liegt vielleicht im
20% and sometimes under
Kernwählerbereich
20%.
bei 20, unter
They got
20% zwischenzeitlich.
28% in the
Die hat
federal
bei der
election
Bundestagswahl
earlier this year, and
28
the AfD
durchgeholt.
got around
So, und die
20%. If
AfD hat
you add
20
them all
geholt. Wenn Sie die
together, what the
zusammenrechnen,
AfD
ist das, was
gets
die
used to
AfD
be
ist,
the right
der
wing
linke
of the
Teil der
CDU.
der rechte Teil der CDU.
In Germany, we
Also
have a
wir haben in
clear middle
Deutschland eine
class,
saubere
centrist
bürgerliche
majority,
Mehrheit, wenn
when
die
the more right-leaning
Linksbürgerlichen sich mit den
centrists get along with the
Rechtsbürgerlichen
more
verstehen.
left-leaning centrists.
Stattdessen
But instead,
verstehen
the
die sich lieber
left-leaning
mit den
centrists
auf der
align
linken
themselves now
Seite,
with the
mit
left,
denen, die
the
unser
hard
Land
left, with whom
zerstören. Das ist
together
die
they destroy
Situation.
our
Und
country.
die haben
That's
sich
the situation.
Ja, das
Well, that's
fasziniert mich.
fascinating.
Wie
How do you
erklären die
explain that?
das? Wie
Isn't the
erklären die das?
AfD the
Ist
natural
die
partner
AfD
of the
nicht der
CDU?
natürliche Partner der CDU?
It's hard to
Ist schwer zu
explain.
erklären.
You
Man
almost
muss
have to
fast
find a
psychologisieren.
psychological
Also,
explanation.
jede
Any normal
normale
party would
Partei
say,
würde
even if I'm
sagen, also
not for
selbst
the
wenn ich nicht für
AfD,
die
I'd at
AfD
least
bin, dann
keep
würde ich
the
mir
AfD
zumindest die
option open so I can use
AfD-Option
that as
offen halten.
leverage
Dann
during the
kann ich bei den
negotiations with
Verhandlungen auf
the
der
other
anderen
side.
Seite mehr rausholen.
If
Wenn es
I
eine
can't get
Militär
along
Diktat
with
drum,
you,
nehme ich
I'll
den
take
anderen
the
zu
other
dem
party
Tisch.
to form a
Ja?
coalition.
Das könnte ich ja
They
machen. Das
could
wäre
do
eigentlich
that. It would simply
intelligent.
be smart,
Selbst
even
wenn ich
if they
da nicht
don't
mit
end up
denen
forming a
koaliere.
coalition with them.
Stattdessen
But
schließt die
instead, the
CDU
CDU
aufgrund des
rules out the
Wokismus in
AfD as a
Deutschland
coalition partner
die
because
AfD, weil
the
der Druck
woke
ist gegen die
zeitgeist in
AfD als
Germany exerts
Verhandlungspartner
tremendous
aus.
pressure on the
Damit haben
CDU
die
against the
Wokisten die
AfD.
Bundestagswahl
And that's how the
gewonnen und
woke
nicht
ended
die
up winning the
CDU.
federal
Denn die
elections and
CDU hat
not the
nur einen
CDU
denkbaren
because the CDU has only
Koalitionspartner,
one
SPD
potential
oder
party to
Grüne.
form a coalition with,
Und Wokismus ist
either the
jetzt, das
Social
ist ja meine
Democrats or the Greens.
Definition,
And
so eine Art
wokeism is now,
Blase, in
according to
dem die
my
sich
definition, a
befinden.
kind of
Das
bubble for
heißt,
those who are inside
das
it,
Volk
which
soll
means the
als
German people should
Volksgemeinschaft
be dissolved as a
aufgelöst werden.
national
Also
community.
das Wort
The words like
Deutschland,
the German national
Nationalfahne und so
flag and
weiter
similar ones
soll
are supposed to
verschwinden. Das ist
disappear.
ganz wichtig.
That's really
Ja?
important. Secondly,
Zweitens,
the system
das
should lead to a
System soll
decrease in
dazu
wealth.
führen,
That
dass
means the
Reichtum
systematic
immer weniger
impoverishment of the German
stattfindet. Das
population is
heißt, die
happening right
systematische
now.
Verarmung der deutschen
Nobody sees
Bevölkerung,
this
die
because
findet
people
heute statt.
say
Das sieht
today are
keiner,
this
weil
many
man sagt,
euros,
heute
yesterday
verdiene ich
are
so
2
viel Euro,
euros
gestern
less.
habe ich
But
2 Euro
when you
weniger
factor in
verdient. Aber wenn
inflation,
Sie die
people have never
Inflation
been as
dagegen
poor as they
halten,
are today.
sind die Menschen noch nie so arm
In the
gewesen wie heute.
1960s and
In den 60er,
1970s, an
70er
average
Jahren
German
konnte sich ein
family, a
normaler
father and
Deutscher,
mother, 2
eine
kids, they could
Familie, also
afford a
eine
car,
Familie,
a
Vater,
house, send
Mutter,
the
2
children to
Kinder,
school,
die
and
konnten
go
sich
on
ein
vacation
Auto
once a year.
leisten,
Today,
ein
buying a
Haus,
house
die
is
Kinder zur Schule
unaffordable in
schicken und einmal
Germany
im
for
Jahr in Urlaub
families with a
fahren.
sole
Sie
breadwinner.
glauben doch nicht, dass
They
in
can't
Deutschland
even
sich einer
afford
noch
2
ein Haus
children.
leisten
That's
kann,
the
wenn er nur
situation.
alleine verdient.
And the
Der kann
system
sich
is
noch nicht mal 2
supposed to
Kinder
continue
leisten.
operating within the framework of a
Das ist die
comprehensive
Situation. Und
socialist
das System
overall.
soll weiter im Rahmen einer
At the
sozialistischen
same time, we also
Gesamtordnung
have
laufen.
state parasitic
Gleichzeitig
systems,
haben
as
wir
in the
aber auch
United States.
staatsparasitäre Systeme, wie in den
There are tons
USA.
of
Es gibt
administrative officials in the
haufenweise
government, outside the
Funktionäre in
government,
der
civil
Regierung,
servants,
außerhalb
NGOs
der Regierung,
that survive
Beamte,
precisely
NGOs.
because
Die
this
leben
system
genau
continues to
davon, dass
operate.
dieses System weiter
That's
stattfindet.
why I liked it so
Deshalb hat
much
mir
when
das so
Trump
gefallen
and
und deshalb
Musk
hassen die
stopped
alle
payments and then
abschalten. Und
simply
Musk,
dissolved some
als
of
er
these
in Amerika
overgrown
angefangen
government
hat, einmal
agencies.
die Zahlung
We need a Musk
einzustellen,
for
und
Germany.
dann
That's
einen
what
Teil
I
dieser
want for
fetten
our country.
Regierungsbehörden einfach aufzulösen. Wir brauchen einen Musk für Deutschland. Das ist das, was ich mir wünsche für unser Land.
You used an
Sie haben
interesting expression
vorhin
earlier,
einen
the front
interessanten Ausdruck
organizations, which means the
benutzt, das
NGOs, all of these
Vorfeld.
organizations that organize
Also
the
die
activists
NGOs,
as the front for the
diese
state or the
Organisationen,
government.
die
I
Aktivisten
like the
organisieren,
expression. I think
als
it is an apt
Vorfeld
term
der,
since it
des
expresses the
Staates, das
dissolution
Vorfeld der
between the
Regierung oder
traditional
des
and formally
State.
very clear separation between what is
Und
private
das ist ein sehr
and
interessanter, ich mag den Ausdruck,
between
ich finde, der ist sehr
what
treffend,
is the
weil er
state.
die Auflösung zeigt
And we
zwischen
see
der
this here in the United States too,
traditionell
this blurring of
früher
the
sehr
borders, when you no
eindeutigen
longer
Trennung
really
zwischen
know
dem,
what
was
is the
privat
state
ist
and
und
what
zwischen
is
dem,
no
was
longer the
staatlich
state.
ist.
Like
Das sehen wir hier
tentacles
in
that
den
reach into
USA
all
sehr
areas of society.
ver
So
Verwischung der Grenzen, was man gar
that
nicht mehr
really
weiß.
seems to
Was
be
ist
very
eigentlich Staat
similar
und was
in
ist eigentlich nicht
Germany.
mehr Staat? Sozusagen wie eine Krake, die sich in alle Bereiche der Gesellschaft hineinschleust. Das scheint in Deutschland also ganz ähnlich zu sein.
You're
Es gibt jetzt
familiar
in
with
der
the
neuen
expression trusted
Entwicklung der
flagger, aren't you?
sogenannte Trusted Flagger. Das kennen Sie, ne?
Yes, that's
Ja,
from the
vom
Digital
Digital
Services
Services
Act.
Act.
That's
Das
the
ist ja auch von
expression
dem
that is
Digital
used.
Services Act.
That is
Muss
still
man
being
wissen, das
developed
ist ja
in
noch,
Germany,
wir
the
haben in
trusted flagger
Deutschland, das ist
system.
aber eine
But there's already one organization that has been approved as a trusted flagger. And this
Und das ist nichts
organization is
anderes als
nothing
eine
else but a state
Staatsorganisation in Form
organization
einer Stiftung.
disguised as a
Das heißt,
foundation.
der
This means
Staat
that the state
gibt
now
jetzt
issues
sozusagen
points
Punkte
or
oder
negative points
Negativpunkte
for
für
people
Leute,
who
die im
publish
Internet
something on
etwas
the internet.
veröffentlichen.
However, since the
Dadurch
state
nennt
is
er
not
sich aber nicht
allowed
mehr
to
Staat,
do
weil der
that, since
Staat
that
möchte er nicht.
violates
Das wäre ein
German
klares
censorship
Verbot gegen die
jurisdiction,
Zensurentsprechung.
it uses the
Aber eine
front
Stiftung noch,
organization, in this
das
case a
fehlt,
foundation.
die
And
aber
this
komplett
foundation is
staatlich
completely
bezahlt ist.
financed by the state.
Welche
Which
Stiftung macht
foundation
das?
is that? It's a youth foundation
Eine
in Baden-Württemberg
Jugendstiftung in
with
Baden-Württemberg
participation from
mit bayerischer
Bavaria.
Beteiligung.
But you know,
Aber
you
wissen
said the
Sie,
state
Sie
can't do
sagen,
the
dass der
flagging
Staat,
itself, but
die
KIVI
dürfen
does
es selber
exactly
nicht machen,
that,
aber KIVI macht doch
which
genau
means
das.
KIVI
Das
is
ist, KIVI
like
ist
a,
wie
yes, but
Ja,
KIVI
ist
doesn't
aber
do it
nicht
as a
als
censorship
Zensurbehörde.
authority.
Die Überschrift
KIVI
von
does it in
KIVI
the
ist
name of making sure that
Überprüfung
journalistic due
journalistischer Sorgfalt,
diligence
weil
is
das
being
im
followed by
Staatsvertrag
content
mal als
creators.
Unterpunkt
And this is
festgeschrieben worden.
because this has been
Und
written
die
down as a
Verfolgung
subclause in the state
von
contract,
Sachen
as
von
well as the
Diligence
persecution of youth
und
protection
von ein paar
offenses and a
anderen
couple of other
Punkten.
points.
Das ist die
All
Kontrolle
that
der
is under the control
Landesmedienanstalten.
of the state
Aber als
media institutions, but it's not
Programmsachverhaltensbund
formulated
bin
as
ich als
total
flächendeckender
surveillance of all
Überprüfer
online
Deutschlands
content
unterhältig.
worldwide. Although that is
obwohl
exactly
sie,
what they are
obwohl,
doing.
obwohl sie genau das tun oder genau
Yes,
Ja, die
these front
Vorwürfe
organizations were
sind
really
ja im
born out of a
Prinzip aus einer
weakness. The
Krise
state itself could
hervorgegangen.
never
Der
control
Staat konnte
directly, and it
niemals
could
direkt
never
kontrollieren, der
directly fund
konnte
things
niemals
that
direkt
Germany's
Gelder für Dinge
constitution doesn't allow
ausgeben,
to be funded
weil
by the
das
state.
verfassungsrechtlich
So
nicht
the
erlaubt ist.
solution they
Also
came
hat der
up with
Staat
was to
NGOs
let the state
bezahlt.
pay and
Also das ist dann
support
etwas
NGOs.
Positives, eine Förderung und
So
kein
that's
Eingriff.
something
Und
positive,
diese
supporting
geförderte
organizations,
Organisation
and
macht
these
Fehler.
organizations then do the dirty deeds that the state
Das
isn't
ist
allowed to
Patent
do.
Umweg.
So
Und
that's
das
the
haben wir
roundabout way they
zwischenzeitlich
came up
vollzogen.
with.
Das war erst eine
And
Schwäche
although it was
und
born out of
zwischenzeitlich ist es eine
constitutionally
Stärke.
prescribed
Denn
state
damit ist die
limitations, it was
Transmissionslinie
developed into a
natürlich
strength,
angesetzt worden.
because
Und die
now this
Anzahl
technique
der
functions as a
Hochüberzeugten,
transmission
die
belt.
andere verfolgen, damit
And then the
gewachsen ist.
effect is that the
Neben
number
der
of the true believers who persecute others has, of course, increased, because that is what these true believers live off. Would you
Würden Sie
say then
sagen, dass
that they
damit ein
found a
Weg
way to
gefunden
circumvent the
wurde,
protective
die
mechanisms of a democratic society?
Schutzmechanismen einer liberalen, demokratischen Gesellschaft zu umgehen?
I would say
Ich
that
würde
over
sagen, sie sind
50% of these
in Deutschland
protective
zu über
mechanisms have
50%
already been
ausgeschöpft.
eliminated. In the end, all that remains is nothing but
Am
a
Ende bleibt
shell.
eine Hülle.
Nur noch
I
diesen
want to
einen
read this
letzten
one
Satz
last
aus dem
sentence from
Drohbrief
the threat letter
vorlesen, weil
against
Sie
Alexander
Sehr gerne.
Wallasch. So I'm
der
going to
letzte
read
Satz
it.
im
They write,
Drohbrief
should you
gegen
not
Alexander
improve
Wallasch.
the
Ich
entire
darf ihn mal
content
vorlesen.
of your news
Er hat
platform
geschrieben,
within 4
sollten Sie
weeks?
Ihr
And
Angebot,
as you
das sind
mentioned
Tausende
already,
von
Alexander
Artikeln,
no
viele
longer
sagen,
even knows
Alexander weiß nicht,
himself
wie viele,
exactly how many
300,
articles he has
3000
written. He
mehr.
estimates
Sollten
about
Sie Ihr
3,000,
Angebot
and
nicht bis zum
it might
10.
well be
März
more.
2025, heute ist
So
der 7.
they
März,
write,
also in 3
should you not
Tagen, Sie
improve
haben
your
den
content
Vormittag
within
des
4
12.
weeks from
Februar
today,
zu
you must
schreiben.
expect that
Übrigens
formal
fast 4
proceedings
Wochen, ja?
will be
Sollten Sie Ihr Angebot nicht
initiated
bis zum 10.
against you,
März
and
2025
you will be
nachgebessert
liable
haben,
for the
müssen Sie
costs.
zeitnah mit der Einführung eines
This is an
kostenpflichtigen
unbelievable threat.
Fördermittelverfahrens
The
rechnen.
people who wrote this to him do, of
Das ist
course,
eine
know that
unglaubliche
Alexander
Drohung.
Wallasch
Die
cannot
Leute, die das
possibly
geschrieben
fulfill
haben,
this task of what
wissen
they
natürlich,
call
dass Alexander
improving his
Wallasch
content.
diese
Improving his
Bedingung
content. It
nicht
is
erfüllen
impossible to do
kann. Es
that.
ist unmöglich, das zu tun.
Yes,
Ja,
it's all
Es ist
about
eine
threatening him.
Drohung.
This is an
eine
absolute
absolut
brutal demand. How do you
brutale
see that?
Forderung. Wie sehen Sie das?
Well,
Also
there's
das
no
ist
legal
völlig
basis, no
ich habe
regulation
keinen
that
Rechtsgrund,
stipulates
also
it. The deadline is
keine
completely
Vollstreckung der
ridiculous, so
Frist.
there's no
Die
legal
Fristsetzung
basis
ist
for the
völlig
entire
lächerlich.
process. And
Ja.
you know, they
Also es
could have
gibt für das
said,
gesamte
if you
Vorgehen
don't
keine
fix your
Rechtsgrundlage.
articles by such and such a date, we'll
Und
sue you.
wissen Sie, Sie können ja
That would
sagen,
have
wenn
been
du
a
bis
clear
zum
statement.
13.8.
But
nicht
no,
zahlst, dann
they didn't
verklagen
do
wir
that.
dich. Das ist eine klare
They
Ansage.
wrote,
Die
if
schreiben,
you
ja, dann
don't
müssen wir
comply
Geld
with
abrechnen.
our
Also
demand,
rechnen
then
heißt, kann
something
sein, kann
might
nicht sein.
happen. It's formulated precisely
Das ist
as
genau
a
als
threat.
Drohung formuliert.
Well, the
Also die
people who
wissen, die
wrote
Leute, die das
this
geschrieben
know
haben,
that,
die
of
wissen
course.
das
Those who wrote
natürlich.
this, they do know
Ja,
this, but
natürlich.
they
Was
wrote
ich
it
gerade gesagt
anyway.
habe, die
Why?
wissen das, aber sie schreiben es trotzdem. haben diesen Drohbrief trotzdem an ihn abgeschickt. Warum?
They sent this letter to him to intimidate him. This is an intimidation attempt against Alexander Wallasch. Politically, Wallasch is, I'd say he's not a dogmatic person. He's not affiliated with one party. He's more of a conservative free thinker. That's how I would describe him. He's not completely signed up with one side, but thinks about issues himself. And those are exactly the people that receive such letters, not the others. And this brings me back to the original concept of unequal application of the law. They're looking for specific people to target. Do you know how
Wie
many
viele
other
andere
people
Menschen
have received
der
such
haben
threat
diesen
letters from the
Zusammenhalt
state media
Nein, das weiß
authorities?
ich mir leider
No,
nicht. Ich weiß
unfortunately, we
von
do not
10
know.
bis
I
12
personally know of
Jugendlichen
around
pro
10 to
Jahr
12
mehr.
people who have
Also das
received
sind ja
them,
auch
but
viele
there are
kleine
also many
Influencer, die
small
haben keinen
influencers who
eigenen
don't
Job
have
mehr.
their own
Die
lawyers,
sind vielleicht
who
mehr
perhaps
darauf
only operate
angewiesen. Das
very
heißt, die haben
sporadically,
Angst,
who
dass
are
sie Druck
afraid, who are
bekommen
trying to
zurzeit.
change their
Ja?
online
Und
content.
auch der Alexander
And
Wallasch, der
Alexander
Angst hat,
Wallasch was
ne?
also
Wegen dieser
afraid initially. He
Maßnahmen
was
jetzt ja.
thinking,
Gebe
what
ich
am
dem
I
jetzt
going to
nach
do?
oder
Do I
nicht?
give
Ne?
in
Was
to
soll ich
this or
jetzt tun?
not? What
Also
should I
der
do
hat ja nicht
now?
sofort
He
gesagt, er
didn't
kommt
immediately
nicht
say,
ins
okay, the
Mainstream
fight is
rein,
on now.
sondern der
He
brauchte auch
needed
einmal
some time to
Zeit.
think this
Zeit.
through and reflect on what his
Also das
options
ist sehr
were.
interessant. Sie sagen,
So
Sie
you say
persönlich
you
kennen 10
personally know
oder
10 or
12
12
Leute,
people who
die
have received
die
similar
ähnliche
letters.
Briefe, die so ähnliche Druckbriefe wie Alexander Wallasch erhalten.
Yes, yes,
Ja,
but
ist nicht
not
mehr der
at the
gleiche
same time.
Fall,
It
schon
was some
länger
time
her.
before
Also
Wallasch
Druckbrief
received
meine ich
his.
damit, die
By threat letters, I
Landesmedienanstalt hat
mean the
jemanden
state media
angeschrieben und auf
authority
seinen
wrote
Brief
to
sind dann
someone
Inhalte
asking them
zurückgekommen.
to review their
Okay,
editorial
Also das
content.
ist jetzt
So
nicht ein Einzelfall.
Wallach's case is not an isolated
okay.
case.
Also
Yes,
es,
okay. Which means that
also
one can
kann man
assume that,
davon
well, you're a
ausgehen,
lawyer and you
wenn
know about
Sie,
lots of these
weil
cases. So
gut,
there
Sie
are
sind
probably
Rechtsanwalt,
hundreds,
Sie
if
hören
not
wahrscheinlich
thousands of
irgendwo
such
diese Fälle, aber
cases.
immerhin, dass es wahrscheinlich Hunderte, wenn nicht Tausende
I
solcher
assume
Ich gehe
gibt.
von
hundreds.
Hunderten aus.
Yes, you know, there are also
Ja?
micro platforms,
Weil Sie
certain
müssen ja sehen, es gibt ja auch
organizations
so
like a soccer club
Mikroplattformen oder
that
irgendwelche
write
Vereine, die
something
schreiben
and
irgendwas.
online, and
Ne?
it's
Also
people
Leute, die
who are
irgendwie
rather
politisch sind
apolitical
oder
but
mal
have taken
politisch
on
was
something
unternommen
political.
haben.
Now,
Ja?
someone writes something,
Schreibt
and
mir
maybe
einer
this is
ein
almost
und sagt mir,
identical
ja,
to
hier
what the
Text
AFD
gelesen, aber das
website
ist ja fast
says.
gleichlautend
So
wie
they
die
basically
AfD.
cut
Ne?
and pasted
Also das
something.
ist nicht
What
sorgfältig, was
does
Sie
a
da arbeitet haben.
football
Das
club or
macht es
soccer
ein
club do
Fußballverein
now when it
vielleicht natürlich, weil
receives
sie es
such
hat
a
den
threat
Text ja
letter?
gar
Of
keine
course, they'll
Verantwortung.
immediately delete the
Ja?
text because
Das
they don't
heißt,
want to get
genau
into
das ist
trouble.
das, die
And that's
Erpressung.
exactly the purpose of this
Ja,
blackmail.
okay, sehr gut.
Well,
Also
I hope people figure
ich
out that
hoffe,
there is absolutely no legal basis for such
dass
threat.
bekannt wird,
That's what's
dass
going on here is
absolut
actually
keine
completely illegal, and that if
Rechtsgrundlage
anyone in Germany, any
existiert
association or anyone who just
für
posts a
derartige
few things or
Drohungen,
has a
dass es
small website or
eigentlich
blog or
völlig illegal
whatever,
ist, was hier
they should
passiert.
stay completely calm and do not do
Und dass
anything at
am
all if
Ende,
they receive such
falls
a threat letter from
irgendjemand in
one of the
Deutschland,
state
irgendein
media
Verein
authorities.
oder jemand, der einfach nur ein paar Sachen postet oder eine
There's
kleine Website
actually
oder
no
Blog
reason to
oder was auch
react at
immer,
all.
dass der
There's no reason to
das
hire a
hochladen
lawyer at
soll
the
und das
moment.
soll überhaupt es
Or
gibt eigentlich
do you
überhaupt
see
keinen
this
Grund zu
differently?
reagieren. Es gibt eigentlich im Moment gar keinen Grund, einen Anwalt einzustellen oder sehen Sie das anders?
Hiring a
Doch, das
lawyer
ist
is a
ja
bit
ist ein bisschen
difficult.
schwierig.
And
In
in
Deutschland
Germany,
ist es
I
so, dass
recommend
das
something
Prinzip
else,
ist
which is
folgendes.
purchase
Schließen Sie eine
insurance to cover
Rechtsschutzversicherung ab.
legal
Ich verkaufe
costs.
jetzt keine,
I'm not selling
aber
them.
schließen Sie
But
eine
get this legal
Rechtsschutzversicherung ab
expenses insurance and
und
make
gucken Sie,
sure
ob
that
Ihre
your internet
Internetkommunikation mit
communications are
dabei ist.
covered. I would
Das würde ich
recommend that to
jedem empfehlen.
everyone. And legal
Und
expenses insurance in
Rechtsschutzversicherungen in
Germany
Deutschland
isn't
sind
that
nicht so
expensive.
teuer.
You pay
Da
between
zahlen Sie
100 and
zwischen
350
100 und
euros a year. And
350
that also
Euro im
includes
Jahr.
employment law
Ja.
protection
Und da
and
ist dann auch der
also stuff
Arbeitsrechtsschutz
like if
drin
you
und
drive too
sowas wie
fast.
Ungefahren.
So everything's
Ja.
included.
Also ist alles
I
mit
would
drin. Das heißt,
recommend
würde ich
legal
jedem
protection
empfehlen, eine
insurance.
Rechtsschutzversicherung zu haben.
Okay,
Okay,
that's very good
das war
advice.
der Tipp.
By the way, in Germany, how
Interessant. Wie
much do
viel
lawyers earn
verdienen
on
Anwälte
average?
im Durchschnitt? Das ist interessant für
Weniger als
Less than
1000 Euro
doctors,
pro Leidenschaft.
unfortunately.
Wie
Approximately how
viel
much? Just
ungefähr?
give a range.
Oder geben Sie mir einfach nur einen Bereich, so von bis ungefähr.
The
Der
average is well under
Durchschnittliche liegt unter
200,000 euros, so I'd say around 100,000 to 120,000 euros, and that is operating
Gewinn.
income. Now, I have
Jetzt
to
muss man
say that this
Folgendes
number
sagen,
isn't
die
very
Zahl
meaningful
ist
because
deshalb
there's
nicht
an
so hoch,
incredible
ne?
number of
Weil
part-time
es gibt im
employees in the legal
Anwaltsbereich in
profession in
Deutschland
Germany,
unheimlich viele
predominantly women.
Teilzeitbeschäftigte
For
über
example, someone is married, his wife has
Das
a
heißt,
law
der ist
degree,
also
is currently
verheiratet, Frau hat
unemployed.
eine
He says to
befristete
her, come on,
Zahl,
get a
hat
bar
keinen
license.
Job, der
You
kommt
can
mal zum
take on a
Anwalt
few
zu, dass er
cases,
selbst
right?
mal ein paar
And
Pfennige
all
verdient.
these
Ne?
part-time
Die kommen
incomes
natürlich alle
contribute
nicht
to
in
the
das
average
durchschnittliche
income,
Geld
and
rein.
that
Und
lowers
damit
it, of
senken die
course.
das
So at the
natürlich. Das
top of
heißt,
the
Sie haben ja
scale, there are lawyers
Spezialanwälte,
who are
die sind
probably earning
sicher in den
millions of euros,
100-Euro-Bereich.
right?
Ne?
And at the
Und
bottom,
dann
there are
genauso
those
die
who are happy to be able to
Vorgeschichte.
cover the rent. The field is very broad.
Okay,
Also
gut.
das Feld ist
Just
sehr breit.
like you,
Okay.
just like you, I hope
Ich
with you
hoffe
that these
mit
formal
Ihnen,
proceedings will be
dass
initiated against
dieses
Alexander. Well,
Firmenverfahren gegen
no,
Alexander
yes and no.
eingeleitet wird.
I mean that.
Nein, also
Yeah,
ja und nein. Ich meine,
well,
Doch,
yeah,
also
I
ich
can
kann
tell
Ihnen
you,
also
sagen,
Alexander doesn't
alles,
want
was
that,
auf
but
dieser
it would
Liste
make me
steht,
happy. Yes,
ja,
of
natürlich,
course,
ich kann
of
für
course, I can
Alexander
completely
kann ich
understand
sagen,
that
verstehe das
he
alles
doesn't
nicht,
want
weil
that. I see that, but
ich
I can also understand your position because you are prepared to litigate this all the way to the highest court and force the state to take its stand, to say whether this is legitimate or not, and to open the whole thing up and make people aware of what exactly is going on here.
Ob das legitim ist oder nicht. Das Ganze auch überhaupt aufzurollen und Leute darauf aufmerksam zu machen, was genau hier abläuft.
I just wanted to say a few final words. Alexander has unintentionally triggered something with that. The threat letter against him was a big topic in the independent and conservative media in the German-speaking world in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, and it also led to a very strong show of solidarity among conservative media outlets that aren't very connected. So in that respect, Tichy wrote about it, and many other publications wrote about it. Politicians have partly taken it up. This isn't over. We are now in the first part of the campaign against this action. Next, we'll attack the state media authority on data protection issues. They don't even have a data protection concept. We are not in defense mode. We are currently on the offensive. The whole thing is absolutely horrific, and similar things have happened here in the United States. That's why so many Americans are so attuned to the topic of censorship. They experience it themselves. Yes, we are glad that the Americans are standing at our side in this fight against censorship.